anything other than amazing. Before we do that, I'm going to read a little something for you, as you knew I would. This is on page 76 of the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous, where the steps are contained, right? Probably there are still some misgivings. As we look over the list of business acquaintances and friends we have hurt, we may feel diffident about going to some of them on a spiritual basis. Let us be reassured. To some people, we need not and probably should not emphasize the spiritual feature on our first approach. We might prejudice them. At the moment, we are trying to put our lives in order, but this is not an end in itself. Our real purpose is to fit ourselves to be of maximum service to God and the people about us. It is seldom wise to approach an individual who's still smarting from our injustice to him and announce that we have gone religious. In the prize ring, this would be called leading with the chin. Why lay ourselves open to being branded fanatics or religious bores? We may kill a future opportunity to carry a beneficial message, but our man is sure to be impressed with a sincere desire to set right the wrong. He is going to be more interested in a demonstration of goodwill than in our talk of spiritual discoveries. Ooh, it's like a cliffhanger. All right, so Terry, welcome, and I look forward to hearing you. Terry, can you not unmute? Let me find you. Hang in there. Is it Terry B?
Terry Murphy.
Oh, okay. Terry B, don't talk. I just unmuted you. Hold on. Oh, there you are. Okay. Terry Murphy, you are now unmuted.
Thank you so much. Hi, I'm Terry and I'm an alcoholic. It is wonderful to be here with all of you today. My heart is full. I've been listening all morning. It's been pretty amazing. Every time I say, hi, I'm Terry, I'm an alcoholic, during these strange days of Zoom meeting, I miss so much the sound of your voices coming back to me and saying, hi, Terry. If I had known today what I knew when I left my home group 2 months ago, when we were circling up to pray, if I had known that was going to be the last time I would be there with my brothers in recovery, I would have taken an extra moment to tell them how much they mean to me and how much I love them. So I am so grateful to be here today with all of you. Something happened to me on the way to my grave. I was 12-stepped into Alcoholics Anonymous. I had no idea that recovery was possible. I had no idea that I wanted it. It wasn't even in my realm of consciousness. I was a kid who started going hard young, and my entire life had been a series of attempts to stop, to control, to change. And every time that I went to stop and I failed, I hated myself a little bit more. And as the years went by, I had gotten to a place of such hopelessness that I didn't even want to try anymore, because I already knew that I was all of the things that people had been telling me for years. All the things that my father would say about, like, you're a sheep, you're easily led, all the things that counselors and people had said to me over the years. What's wrong with you? Hell, if I knew the answer to that. So every time I went to stop, I'd raise my right hand to God. I'd swear on my dead mother's grave. I'd swear on the lives of my children, only to start again. And every time I started again, I hated myself more and more and more. And one day, as I was approaching what I know to be an early death, I was 35 years old. I was 140 pounds. I was hopeless. And I was in a pawn shop in Phoenix, Arizona. And the man in the pawn shop looked at me and he said, dude, I don't know if you're in trouble or not. And the minute he opened his mouth, my mind slammed shut. It was like, here it is. I'm going to hear it one more time. One more person who's going to tell me what's wrong with me. My whole life, people have been saying that to me. My mom used the tool she had, which was shame. My father used the strap. The schools used counselors. The police used handcuffs. The judges used sentences. The military used court martials. I met a beautiful woman. I fell madly in love when I was a young man, and I thought her love would change me. And then she gave me the gift of sons. And I thought, my God, my boys, I would kill for them. I would die for them. I would do anything for them, but I couldn't stop drinking for them. At night, I would lock the doors of the house to make sure that I was keeping everybody safe. But what I've come to realize as a result of working the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, that I was locking the monster on the inside. The person who was hurting my wife and my children was not the boogeyman. Freddy Krueger was not at the door. It was the father in the house. And so I was in this place of total despair, and this man had authority over me because he controlled the money that was going to keep my run going. And I thought, oh, great, here I go. I've been praying to God for a miracle. I've been saying, please send me an angel, do something, help me. I didn't want to be such a failure as a husband and as a father. I'm a good person with a good heart, but my behaviors had become so utterly destructive over so many times. And everybody around me, the condition of my life when that man worked his 12th step on me was my marriage was on the rocks. My children were scared and blameless. My parents were dead. My brothers and sisters, I'm one of 10 kids, would not even speak to me anymore. I was in a place of unemployment. I was sucked up. I was destroyed in every area of my life. And I thought the only way out was suicide. And when that man started to talk to me in that pawn shop, I thought, here we go, one more time, one more person who's going to give me some more about what's wrong with me. But what was different about this man is he flipped the story. He said, dude, I don't know if you got a problem or not, but I used to have a problem. And so what the beautiful thing that says in this book of ours that I love so much, it says that an alcoholic properly armed with the facts about himself can go into that place in my heart that no one could ever get. Not punishment, not love, not hope, nothing could get there. But this man, he started to tell me his story. He said, I was in such a bad place. He said, I couldn't stop drinking. And I went to this place called Alcoholics Anonymous. And I've been clean and sober ever since. And I own this pawn shop and everything in it. And he raised his hands up and then he pointed at me and he said, you know, a lot of it used to be yours. And I thought to myself, damn, that's cold, right? So I am in the middle of what I now know today to be the singularly most important moment of my life. I had my hand on a miracle. It was there, it was happening. That angel I've been praying for was there, but my diseased mind had already told me what that angel would look like. And it didn't look like a chubby, scruffy man in a pawn shop. But I listened to this guy, and you know what I was doing when I was listening to him? I was judging him. And I was saying to myself, oh, this poor bastard. If I just let him preach a while longer, maybe I'll get a little extra 20 for my Bose speakers. So that tells me about the kind of God that I have come to know and love as a result of the steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. That in my darkest moment, in my moment of greatest need, when God sent an angel to me, I judged that angel, but that power didn't withdraw that love. So I got introduced, I got 12-step into Alcoholics Anonymous. And I have devoted my life from that day forward to going out and doing likewise. Because I did not know I was an alcoholic. I had no idea I was one, even though upon review with the steps, it was obvious. Anybody looking at me would tell you that guy's got a serious problem. But it doesn't matter what they see, it's what I see. And I suffer from a disease that blinds me to the truth about myself. And I was blinded to the truth about myself so utterly. I couldn't see what had happened to my health or to my marriage. I couldn't see what I was doing. I could not hear my own wife and children's cries. I couldn't see their tears. My life radically changed. I was fortunate I got to go to treatment, and I want to share the transformation that occurred, and I'm going to walk you through my 8th and 9th step experience over the past years. My sobriety date is May the 23rd, 1991, and I have done my work and I continue to do it. And so the condition of my life, I went into treatment. I was fortunate for that. It was Father's Day, 1991, and I was given an assignment by my counselor, and that was to write a letter to forgive my father, right? Because I had all these problems with my dad and what he had done. So I wrote this letter, and when I read that letter to the newcomers in my small group, they all cried with me. And in that letter, I talked about how I was breaking the chains of alcoholism that had bound my family since we came over from Ireland. I was talking about how my dad didn't support the fact I was a good athlete, and he didn't help me to do that. And then my dad used the strap, and then he did, and so I write all this stuff out. And when I was done with that letter, they were in tears. Now I'm going to move forward 2 years. It took about 2 years. And I thought back on that letter, and I realized everything in that letter was a lie other than the fact that he was my father. And it wasn't that I was intentionally being dishonest. What it was is my perception of life had changed as a result of working 12 steps that I didn't believe in and praying to a God that I knew did not believe in me. And what I did is I had this realization that I forgave my father. Now, let me tell you what kind of father I was. I robbed my children. I stole their piggy banks. I took the money for their college funds. I cheated on their mother. I created so much stress in my household. I gave a talk a couple of years ago, and my oldest son at 30 years of age was in the car with me. He was 7 when I got sober. And when we were done, he said, "Dad, you gave a great talk tonight." He said, "But there's one part of your story you might want to rethink." And I said, "Yeah, what's that?" He said, "You said you didn't bring it home." He said, "Dad, I was a 2nd grade boy with ulcers. You brought it home. You may not have drank it home, but the stress and the pressure that we lived under in that house. How do you make amends for that one? How do you apply the steps of Alcoholics Anonymous in such a way to make amends for stealing your children's childhood, their sense of peace and their well-being?" I had no idea the answer to those questions, but today I can assure you this. If I work these steps and I apply the spiritual principles that are embedded in this program into my daily living, it heals it all. The amends get made. So I know where my life is today. And I know that what happened to me as a result in those first years of that transformative process with the steps was not my dead father that changed. He died 2 years before I got sober. It was me. My dad was a man who, my mother got sick with cancer when I was 11. My dad's day looked like this: 10 kids, get up in the morning, get breakfast ready, get the kids off to school, go to work, leave work, go to the hospital to be with his wife, leave her, go back to work, come home, cook dinner, do laundry, help with homework, go back to the hospital to see his wife, come home and lay himself to bed. And I found the need to forgive my father. Holy smoke, how delusional this disease made me. I can assure you, I am the perfect person today to speak about steps 8 and 9 because I did so much harm. And I have done the work that has healed my life and healed my relationships through steps 8 and steps 9. What I like to tell you is this. Step 8, when I got to do that, I was taught to make a good list. You know, to go back to the cities and the places and the schools and everything, to shake my memory, shake my consciousness. So, because what I know is if there's a weak 8th step list, it produces a weak 9th step. So I got the right list. And then I went about it and we prioritized the amends based on some of them I couldn't touch. Some of the amends had money attached to them, and I'm unemployed with a wife and 2 little kids trying to scrape together enough to buy some groceries. So there was a process that happened for me in my amends, and I'm going to go over my amends in 3 different areas. I'm going to talk about the early amends first, and my early amends, I'm going to touch on this one. So my marriage is hanging by a thread. I mean, my marriage is done. I've been caught with infidelities. We've been bankrupt. My wife's car's been repossessed out of the driveway before. I mean, our marriage is on the rocks. I'm newly sober. I have a point in my life. I just want you to know the man that's speaking to you today. There was a point in my life where my wife got pregnant. And at 7 months, she said, something's wrong. The baby's not moving. And we went and they did an ultrasound at the birthing center. And they came back and they said, Mr. and Mrs. Murphy, we're so sorry, but your son's dead. And then they turned to my wife and they said, ma'am, in keeping with the natural order of things, you need to carry this dead baby to term. We walked out of that hospital, no clergy, no counsel. And everywhere we went, the story was the same. We went to my sister's first. I started slamming Tia Maria. It was the only alcohol in the house. Just had to get something in me. I can't deal with this. Everywhere we go, people are saying, is it a boy or a girl? Have you decorated the room? Finally, after a while, my wife says to me, she says, I can't do this anymore. What I heard my wife say was, we need to go induce labor. So we went down there and they induced labor. They put us right across from the nursery. You know, we're not always the ones that do all the wrong. Sometimes the world wrongs us too. The unthinking people that would put people giving birth to a dead child across from a nursery staggers my mind today. I cannot even think what my wife was feeling. All day long, people were going up to look at their babies while she's going to push. When my son was born, they wrapped him in a blanket and they handed me my boy, and I stepped back and I refused to take him, and I left his body in the hospital. 2 weeks later, when my wife needed me the most, and I had a little 3-year-old at home who was wondering what the hell's going on? Why are mom and dad crying all the time? What has happened to my life? Nobody's talking about my brother anymore. When my family needed me the most, I don't know what alcohol did for all of you, but I'll tell you what it did for me. It turns me into a coward. 2 weeks after giving birth to our son, Brandon, I left my wife and fled to the state of Utah with one of her girlfriends. How do you work your step 9 on that? That was the condition of my life when I came in here. How do I make amends for the things I've done? How do I make amends to my mom who died when I was 15, scared to death that I was going to beat her to the grave? How do you do this? I'm going to try to show you how it happened. So somebody did that miracle, right? The miracle happened. I end up in AA. I get to go to treatment. I get to start to work at some stuff. I get a little job. We have no money. We're broke. We're scared. We're destitute. We're trying to learn how to trust again a little bit in the household. We go to the mailbox every day together because the mailbox had become like the source of pain in our lives. The bills, the dishonesties, the bounce checks. That's how my wife found out about an affair when the slip came from an envelope from the hotel we had spent our wedding night in that I had then since been with another woman in that hotel, and they mailed the receipt to our home. My life was filled with so much pain, I just could not believe it. That's why I thought the only way out was to take my life. And so we go up to the mailbox together, and out of the corner of my eye, I see something that says Utah on an envelope. And I pull out the mail and I slide that one in my pocket. And I go to work that day and I open it up. And it's a letter from a collection agency from the apartment I lived in with that woman right after that time. Now picture this. My marriage is literally hanging by a thread. We have no money. There's no way I can pay this bill. I open it up and it says that I owe like $1,600. So I thought, oh man. So I called the woman right away and I said, hi, my name is Terry Murphy and you must be mistaken. I'm a married man in Arizona and I don't know what you're talking about some apartment complex in Utah. Please, don't ever contact me again or you will hear from my attorneys. Click. And then I took that piece of paper and I started shredding it. I started ripping it into a million pieces and I threw it in the trash can. And then all day long, this new thing called a conscience, a God consciousness. I didn't know what it was. Dude, that wasn't right. So I called my sponsor and I said, hey man, this is what happened. He goes, I don't know what to tell you. Call your grand sponsor. So I called my grand sponsor and I told him, and he said, what do you think you should do? And I said, I think I ought to pull it out of the trash. And he said, I'll support you in that. So I dug in that trash can filled with spit and soda, and I put together the jigsaw puzzle and got that lady's name and that phone number. It was too late in the day. The next morning I called and I got that woman on the phone and I said, ma'am, I'm Terry Murphy. I spoke to you yesterday. I lied to you. And she went, I know you lied. And I'm expecting her to like fire up the brass band. Oh, wow, what a great guy. And I told her, I said, ma'am, I've been doing stuff like that my whole life. I'm newly sober and Alcoholics Anonymous. And if something doesn't change, I don't know what I'm going to do. So I got to face this. I said, this is the most painful and shameful part of my life we're talking about here. And she said, I'm in a 12-step program too. And she said, I'll tell you what, she goes, there were 2 people on this bill. So I'm cutting it in half to 800. And because I have some discretionary authority, I'm going to divide that in half too. Can you send me $25? I said, yes, ma'am. And now came the hard part of that amends. I had to go open that can of pain in my wife's life with me with 60 days of sobriety. But it's either I'm going to trust this program and I'm going to go for it, or I'm going to have to rely on the very things that caused me to want to take my life. So I got home that day and I sat with my wife and I said, Donna, I got to talk to you. And I explained to her what I was doing and the amends that I needed to make. And she said, thank you for telling me that. We'll find the $25. I'll tell you this with absolute certainty today. Had I not dug that bill out of that trash can, y'all would have a different speaker today on steps 8 and 9. Because the change had to take place. I'm going to move you forward a few years. So things start getting brighter. We're doing good. Get a job, start doing well. Now the whole paycheck's coming home, hope's on the horizon. And as a result of my inventory, I realized I had a big amends coming to an insurance company. I had robbed my own house at one point, one of my brilliant ideas, and turned in a false insurance claim. So the bill was $6,000. I didn't have $6,000. The idea of having $6,000 had never crossed my mind in my entire lifetime. But what I did is I knew I had to face it. So I got with my sponsor, we created a plan, and I started getting money orders for $200. Every month I'd buy a $200 money order. and that was the amount that you didn't have to show ID, because we knew if I went forward to the insurance company, I'd have to implicate others. And in step 9, it says that we do not cause further harm. So I start saving the money orders. And as the stack gets good and fat, then one day it was time. And there were $6,000 in money orders. And I wrote a letter to that insurance company. I explained that I was a member of Alcoholics Anonymous and that I was clean and sober and that I had robbed them. And here was their money. And I mailed it anonymously. And then I sat and waited for the thank you letter, of course, because in my disease thinking, it's like, man, I have an interesting mind. Another amends came up as a result of my inventory in those early days. And this amends was to an employer. Now, at this time, I'm working in finance. I'm a finance manager, right? So I'm the guy that takes care of money. And this was from stealing money out of the till at a company. And I knew if I faced this one, that all this man had to do was call the police or to contact my current employer, and could literally blackball me from my industry forever. And I was taught right about how to make financial amends, that you don't make the amends. There's a thing that I made this word up once, and I think it's funny, and it's like, I call it premature amendulation. And it's where guys practice this all the time. I see a guy get sober, and the first thing they want to do is go make amends to their ex-girlfriend. You got to check your motives about what are you doing. It says that in the 12 and 12, we got to look out for the age-old problem of hiding a bad motive under a good one. And I was taught that you don't go to an amends with rambling of how sorry you are. You go with changed behavior and the money. So I got the money. I made an appointment, and I went to see my old boss. Now I walk into his place, I'm shaking like a leaf. He's got a giant office, right, with a big, huge glass wall looking to the mountains. And I'm looking at him, and I just took a prayer. But you know what? I'd worked my other steps. I did not walk into that amends alone. And what I did is I sat down and I told him, I said, Stuart, the reason I'm here today is that I need to apologize to you. I need to make amends to you. Now, I use the language that I speak in a normal day. I don't use recovery terms. I don't use a card that says, I harmed you in the following ways. How the hell could I ever fill out a card that could explain how I harmed the people that I've wronged in my life? So I went in and I spoke, as Bill described, the language of the heart. And I said, you were a great boss and you trusted me. And you put a lot of faith in me. And I did you wrong and I stole from you. And I'm sorry for what I did. And I pulled out the check and I handed it to him. And he leaned back in his big chair and he looked at that check. And I saw the tears streaming down his face. And he said, I knew I was right to always believe in you. It just took a little while, man, for the man that I could see to come alive. And then he proceeded to offer me a job, almost double what I was making. And I looked him in the eyes, and it was one of those intuitive moments, right? And I looked him in the eyes and I said, I didn't come here for a job today. And I didn't take it, because if I would have taken the job, somehow that would have sullied what I was there for. I was there to make right the wrongs that I inflicted upon this man. And so I like the way that my recovery and the way that my life is going, and I'm trusting God. And that job that his would have doubled as the years went by, mine got better and better too. So by living the program every day in my household, by practicing the principles in all my affairs, I was able to make amends to my young sons. I love the way that Larry told that story that Clancy had given him that sage advice about not intruding into these kids' world with your story of sorrow. And so what I did is I was a good dad. I helped with the homework. I did the stuff that a father does. I treated their mother with love and respect, which I think was the greatest amends I could make to my boys. When my son Brian was in the 6th grade, he was 3 when I got sober, so he was probably 11 at that time. He had an assignment at school, and it was to write about somebody who he thought was an instrument of God's peace, an example of God's love. They talked about Martin Luther King and Gandhi and the Pope, and they talked about sports figures and people that were ideal, and they were supposed to write about them. And one day I came home from work, and my wife Donna said to me, "You know that assignment your son's got?" I said, "Yeah." She goes, "He's writing about you." So a little while later, man, that little boy said, "Dad, I want to read you something." And he pulled up a chair for me in the middle of the kitchen of my house. And he said, "My dad is the greatest example of a man who is an example of God's love." And he proceeded to talk about that I run a toy drive, and that I pray on my knees morning and night, and that I help others, and that I go to the jails to work with others and do correctional work. And the amazing thing about that is really what it was my inventory through the eyes of my 6th grade son. I didn't say, "I'm going to pray, son," or, "Hey, look, son, here's the toy drive I'm doing." It's just, he saw it. The kids see a lot more than I ever dreamed they saw. So I was able to make things work well, and I was able to make the amends to my wife and to my family and to my in-laws who I treated their daughter so horribly. I did all that stuff. And then I hit the middle years of my recovery. And I'll tell you what, time matters to me. I've been on this journey for a long time, and God constantly reveals more to us. And I believe that God was revealing something to me in my amends process, that God gave me my amends as I could handle them. Almost like he wrapped me in this blanket of love and emotional shock, so that the full brunt and weight of all the wrongs didn't crash on me when I was new and unable to handle them. I can tell you this, I've made more and heavier amends from 15 to 28 than I did in the first years. And I have never deliberately hidden something off an inventory or dodged an amends. Our book says it, more will be revealed. And it doesn't mean we're going to always like what's revealed. So I'm going to share with you on my 15th sobriety birthday. I was up running in the mountains by my house, and I was trail running. I was feeling strong. And just then this coyote crossed the trail in front of me, and he stood on a rock and pushed his chest out overlooking the city. And I saw that as a sign from my creator, right? Like, wow, here I am. I'm physically fit. I've done my work. I'm 15 years sober, and I get this gift. And as I start running on, I think, thank God all my amends are done. And then I hear this voice in my head. What about those men who you did wrong in Germany? And then right away, my mind thought, what? I don't even remember their names. And then I hear Curry and Dean. And then I go, I don't even remember their ranks. Spec 4 and E5. Instantly, my mind said, you better leave that alone. They could sue you. You're going to lose everything you've worked for the past 15 years. So follow me on this. 15 years sober, I was 50 years old. This scandalous behavior where I had talked shit about people and cost them grave harm had occurred when I was 19. It had taken more than 30 years for this wrong to percolate from where I had buried it under bottle after bottle, deeper and deeper. It took 30 years for it to reach my consciousness. All the other steps were cleared the way so I could see what else needed to be worked on. I do the work, God shines the flashlight. It took 30 years for it to come to my consciousness, and it took 30 seconds for my mind to give me a list of all the reasons I better leave that shit alone. I knew if I left it alone, I wouldn't stay sober. And I think that that's what happens sometimes to people where we're faced with those kind of moments. You know, am I able just to let bygones be bygones? What should I let go? What should I interact with? So what I did is I thought, I can't forget this, because see, it takes, whenever I recall and amend, I write it down, because if I don't write it down, I forget it. I never, ever had to write down a bad habit. I always remembered those, you know, but so with this amend stuff, so I thought, let me remember this so I could, when I get off this mountain, I could get with my sponsor. And then I said to myself, well, thank God there's nothing else. And then I heard this. What about abortions? Now, none of this stuff had ever occurred in any of the inventories that I'd ever taken, where I had scandalously in a court defamed two people, and how I had participated in two different abortions. Never showed up on an inventory, but it showed up that day. So I got with my sponsor, Howard Polans. I got with him on one of them, but I didn't go to him on the abortion stuff. I went to my spiritual advisor, Father John B. from Tempe. And the reason I did that is because Howard always believed that you can't take life. Life just changes form. And that wasn't my belief system. So I wasn't looking for an ass whipping, but I had to reconcile this truth with myself. So what I did is I went and I proceeded and I got my military records and I amended that wrong. And then I got with Father John and I got right with that. And I wrote a letter that day. And I found that letter today. I hadn't read it till today. Dear beautiful baby, I wonder what joys you would have brought to the world. What would you have created? People often say they wouldn't change a thing, but not me. If I could, I would have changed that abortion. The circumstances, the selfishness, the blindfold blocking out the truth of the moment are not excuses. It's just the way it was. I love life, and today do what I can to help others to love life too. I'm sorry for not being there for you. I do my best today to be there for others. Are you an angel? Do you know God? Can you see me? Can you please pray for me? In my self-centeredness and selfishness, in those ways, I was incredibly unmindful. My ability to act without regard amazes me. I've worked hard with God's help to change all that. Slowly, I felt it working. I can't undo what's done, but I can change, and through my change, positively affect those who God would have placed in my path. I've never said I love you to you, but I say it now. I love you. I'm sorry. Thank you, Ralph, for inviting me today. Thank you for giving me the chance to touch my heart, because that's how God heals, right? The healing that's occurred in my life, it's happening, right? So as a result of prayer and meditation, as a result of working with others, what's occurred for me is that I have encountered the amends that I still need to make. I've encountered the brokenness. I was working with a guy who told me he stole a bike. And when he said that, I said, man, you got to make that right. And then I remembered when I robbed the Huffy Bike Factory in Azusa, California. So I couldn't go back to the bike factory, man. It was a long time ago. The factory's gone. What I started doing is I started buying Huffy bikes and putting them in all of our local raffles. So if you're ever in Arizona and you're bidding on a Huffy bike, just know that somewhere behind that is a step 9. I've been able to learn how to make amends, right? I've learned as these middle years of my life have gone by, as a result of retreats and prayer and meditation, I've learned how to make amends to, I've learned how to make amends to the dead. I've learned how to get right with my mom, who died in 1971, and my dad, who died in 1989, and my son, Brandon, who died in 1990. I've been able to make it right through all of that stuff because the power of these steps. See, the only thing that limits the power of this program is my lack of willingness to do the work, to avail myself to this process. I cannot steer this ship. When I steer the ship, it always slams into the rocks. When I allow a higher power to steer this ship, the seas aren't always smooth, but the destination is always assured. I got stories of healing grace that would blow your mind. And when I was so amazed at the fact that I've been able to have these vital spiritual experiences from beyond the grave through working my steps, I thought that that was special. And then I read in our book what it says in step 10. It's coming up next. We've entered the realm of the spirit. And in the realm of the spirit, anything's possible. I'm living proof that no matter how much harm you've caused or how broken you are, that if you're willing to do this work, tremendous things occur. But just because I'm on the spiritual path doesn't mean I'm always spiritual. I got to share this one with you, right? So my current sponsor has a book club. And what he does, he's a priest, and he puts out books for you to read, right? Suggestions. So anybody goes to that church, gets that book, reads it, and then they can have discussion. So I was reading this book one night, laying in bed next to my beautiful wife. We've been married 41 years now. And my wife, Donna, says her favorite place is as close as she can get to me, because the program of Alcoholics Anonymous is as real in our home as it is in my heart and as it is in my Zoom meetings or face-to-face meetings. So I'm reading something to Donna. I go, hey, Donna, I'm on page 167 of this book, and listen to this. I don't even remember what the quote was. And I gave it to her. And she says, wow, that's great. So the very next day, we're at my sister's house for dinner, and my sponsor, the priest, is there. My little brother is there. And the subject of the book comes on. The book's probably 300-page book. And my little brother, he's talking about the book. And I said, yeah, I said, that book's great. And then he goes, you read that book? Now I'm reading the book. He said, you read that book? And I said, yeah, I read that book. And I'm sitting next to my wife. And so I instantly go, in fact, I like it so much, I'm reading it again. And last night I was reading to Donna on page 167. It said this. Why did I do that? That night I took it to my higher power in my nightly review. But and that's what I do. I don't make amends for thoughts. I make amends for actions. But what I do is I reconcile them through the process that the steps give us. I reconciled it through this 10-step, through the nightly review process. But when I got up the next morning, I still had a knot in my gut. And I knew what to do about that. So I called my little brother and I said, hey, man, I lied to you last night. He said, oh, bro, it don't matter to me. I said, but it matters to me. And then I said to my wife, Dawn, I said, why do I do stuff like that? She goes, you just don't want to lose your skill, but the deal is that, I'm engaged in this thing. I recognize the weaknesses that I have. I recognize that I need this program as much today as I did when I was that new guy, being 12-stepped or sitting in that treatment center. So now I want to talk about the current years and what's happened with my amends in these days. So in my current years, recently I was doing a lead on step 9 for a very fundamentalist AA group that just wanted everything out of the book, straight out of the big book, just go. And so cool, I'm down with it. But as I start to go into step 9, I had to stop myself. And I said, I can't tell you about my amends if I don't tell you about the man I was before. Because just to hear these stories without knowing what a broken person I was, you lose the perspective. So I took one quick minute to talk about how bad my life was before AA. And I said, I used to talk about taking my life all the time. And I would tell my wife that I wanted to kill myself and that if I was dead, she'd be better off. And you know what? I've been saying that many times over the years. That was the first time I ever heard it. The tears started. The weight of those words hit me, and I wrote it down so I wouldn't forget it, so I could make amends. And I thought to myself before I went to make those amends, what would that be like to have the person that you're married to, that you've been with, your partner, telling you on a regular basis that they would rather be dead than in this relationship with you? So I was able to say to Donna, I was able to say, I'm really sorry for the way that I had done those things. And she looked at me, she said, that's okay, thank you. She goes, it was dark back then. How dark it is before the dawn, as Bill so eloquently wrote. How true that is, right? So I was able to, so when amends come up, these things still happen, but how do I show this in my day-to-day living? I watch my granddaughters a lot as a way to make amends to my sons. And I do that by being fully present so that I can help them as they're going through this thing called careers and life. And in fact, in the other room right now is my 9-year-old granddaughter. And this kid calls me Papa, and she loves me with all her heart. And it's a beautiful thing that I've been able to re-experience through my granddaughters what I missed in my own children's lives. Because in those early years, I was consumed with self and the bottle, and I missed out on all that stuff. When my family gathers and they're talking about the stories of when all the kids were together when they were little, I don't remember those stories. You know what this is? I think this is a gift from God. I think it's God's way of saying, you get your own do-over here, Terry. So it's pretty cool for me. So the other things that I've learned to do is I've learned that love is a whole bunch of actions. And so I do the dishes every night, and I do it with a loving heart. And I make the coffee so that when my wife gets up in the morning, she could just push the button and it's ready to go. I was with a friend, and he told me that he had made the bed sometimes as a meditation in the morning, as an amends for his wife. And I thought, oh, that's nice for you. And when I got home that day, I looked up and I get up into my bedroom, and the sun was shining right on that unmade bed. And I thought, okay, I get the picture. So I made that bed. And I made that bed as a meditation of love. And I've made that bed every morning as an amends and as a meditation of love for the past probably 15 years. It's just the little acts of service. It's the little things that I get to do. I get to work with a lot of men, and I get to heal my broken relationships through seeing their relationships heal. I told you my parents died before I got sober, but I sponsor a lot of young men who parents are alive and they got broken relationships. And as I help them to heal their relationships, somehow my heart heals a little bit. I was at a wedding recently for a young man who was just a beautiful person, right? And he's got a couple of years of sobriety. And I said to his mom just before we were going to head down the aisle, right? Just before I said to her, I said, "What are you feeling?" And she looked at me and she said, "I don't know," because I never planned his wedding, only his funeral. Alcoholism, it's nasty. If I had to describe alcoholism with one word, the word I would choose is thief, because that thief enters a life and it takes everything that is near and dear and precious and important, and it just keeps taking. So the last things I'm going to touch on are amends to self, right? So the way that I got around to that was that I started to, I learned how to love myself. I learned how, as a result of, I've discovered that if I can help others find a relationship with a power greater than themselves so that they can stop drinking and they can become the person they're supposed to be, that somehow that heals the wound in me. And so it's this beautiful symphony. So I'm in the middle of making amends to the world. You know, that's really the way that I see this. My entire life is a living amends. You know, these are strange days, right? I live in Arizona, and I don't know if y'all are following what's happening out here on the Navajo Indian Reservation, but they have the highest rate of infection in the nation, highest death rate. And because my home group is called the Wolf Pack, we also have a AA Wolf Pack up on the Navajo Reservation. So I reached out to some of my Navajo brothers and I said, "Hey, how is it?" And they said, "Man, it's hard up here." You know, and he was crying. He said, "It's so bad for my people." And I said, "Maybe we ought to do something about that." So I took it to prayer and then reached out to a few other guys in my home group. And we jumped on a Zoom call. And then we launched an organization called Helping Hands for the Navajo Nation. And over the last couple of weeks, we've been delivering massive truckloads, semi-loads of food and masks and gloves and hand sanitizer. And every time we turn around and whatever the need is, there's something there to meet it. And we were able to go up there. We were able to deliver all this stuff the other day up on the reservation. We're going again this Wednesday. And as I'm walking in the end of the day, and we busted 7 giant trucks filled with food to 3 communities. And as I'm walking to my car, I hear this voice. And she says, "Mr. Murphy." And I turn around and it's this beautiful Navajo woman. And she's wearing turquoise and she just looks so incredible. And she says, "Thank you. What you and your friends have done will live forever in the hearts of my people." And it took my breath away. And as I started to get in my car, and she said, "One more thing. Thank you for helping my sons. Because I'm one of the guys that got the Wolf Pack going down here and then introduced it up there. And her boys got sober in Alcoholics Anonymous." So you never know what you do. You never know how God is going to take it. You never know that out of all that brokenness and all that selfishness and all that self-centeredness, that it is possible to have a human life like the mythological phoenix bird rise from the ashes to see a new life. All because somebody worked their 12-step on me. All because somebody stood between me and that early grave. I love Alcoholics Anonymous, and I love all of you. Thank you for letting me share today. Peace.
Wow. Thank you so much. Incredible. Thank you.
Thank you.